Now that we know how to stabilize a hyperlapse with images, let's go ahead and look at how to stabilize a hyperlapse with a video file. So for this example, I prepared a video file from London I shot and raw clips. Let's write this one. Let's scrub it through, and as you see, the camera is panning left and right. That's because even though I held down the lock button on the gimbal kept shifting left and right. So I had to release the button and correct it manually, and that's why we got some wobbles in here. But that's no problem, we're going to fix this in After Effects. So let's go ahead and import this file into footage. And now I want to create a new composition out of it. Let's rename this and call this London Tower Bridge. Let's sort it out into the main comps because this is going to be our main composition. Now let's take a look at this clip again. As you see, I'm going just straight and correcting these pans my gimbal took manually. And this clip is almost 4 minutes long. So the first step with a video hyperlapse is speed up your clip. So I like to speed up my clips to around 3 to 10 seconds. But before we speed up the clip, let's go ahead and correct our frame rate of the composition because it's 25 and I want it to be 24. So composition settings, go ahead and 24. And as you see, this video right here I shot at 4K. So I have enough resolution for my tracker to work correctly. Hit on OK. And now we can go ahead and speed up our clip time stretch. Let's dial in. I want this to be 3 seconds long. Hit on OK. Let's zoom in. Go to the last frame right here. Hit N on your keyboard. So the N button shifts your work area to your current framing right here or here. And I want it to be right there. So I right click on this and trim composition to work area. So now that our composition is exact 3 seconds long, let's go ahead and play this one back again. And as you see, this hyperlapse looks terrible in RAW format. It's doing these crazy pannings, it's not stable, it's almost like shaky, but that's no problem for us because we're going to save this in a few seconds. So we want to go ahead and pre-compose this composition so we work in a nice and clean and fresh composition. Again, move all attributes because we do not want any speed keyframes on this composition right here. So hit on OK. Now we got the same clip but without the speed parameters in this composition. Let's go ahead and rename this to be speed up. Let me drop this composition into a pre-composition to keep everything clean and organized. Now that we sped up the clip from 4 minutes to 3 seconds, we can now jump to step 2, tracking the position. And now we can click on this clip right here and we can again click on Stabilize Motion. This opens up again a new window with our tracking point. It's basically the same procedure as with the photo hyperlapse. Make sure that only position is checked. Click on Options. I'm going to rename this to Position. I'm going to work again with luminance. I want to enhance before match. I want sub-pixel positioning. And again, I want to tell After Effects, please stop the tracking if your confidence is below 90% instead of just continuing. And now click on OK. Again, I go in the middle of my frame and I think I'm going to stabilize this point right here. That's quite contrasty and I think After Effects will have a good time stabilizing and finding out the correct tracking data right here. And again, I click on play button. So again, click on speed. Oh, this is where it got messed up. Correct it right here. Correct it right there. Make sure this point is in the middle. Oh, my search area right there was you can also increase this or this. But like I said, the bigger the search area, the longer After Effects will take to stabilize this. So I can click U on the keyboard right here and now I can see where After Effects did all the keyframes. So I go to the first keyframe right here and I do the same procedure but only tracking backwards. As you see, every frame has a keyframe right there, so our track is basically done. So now that every keyframe is correct, go ahead and again check if my target is correct. This is the clip we are working with. Click on OK and I simply hit apply. I want X and Y dimensions because we're moving up and down and left and right. So click on OK. Let's play back this. And as you see, We went from a completely shaky clip to a really stable and smooth hyperlapse without even applying the warp stabilizer or without even trying to mess around with the warp stabilizer. This is the quick way to do it manually with your hands, and this entire procedure took me around 2 minutes of actually working. So it's much better than working with the warp stabilizer. So the good thing with the video hyperlapse when you're using a gimbal is you do not have to correct the rotation. So the gimbal doesn't tilt left or to the right when you're using the lock mode. So we do not have to care about the rotation. As you see, we do not have any rotation jumps right here on this clip. So this is basically done. We now just have to get rid of the black borders and add some motion blur. So let's do that right here. So again, there's two ways to get rid of the black borders. First way is you could scale up your footage so that the black borders disappear, but this way you don't have native 4K anymore, because you're going above the 100% scale. So again, my favorite way of doing this would be again to tile in motion tile into an effects panel, drag it onto my clip. Again, I adjust only the output parameters. I want this to be 150, and I think 150 is enough right here. Again, I want to mirror the edges. The black borders are basically gone, and our clip stays at native 4K resolution. Let me show you before and after. So we went from this into this without using warp stabilizer in only like 2 minutes. So the last step would be to add some motion blur. So let's go ahead and pre-compose this. Name it position. This is also not a main composition, this is our pre-composition. And now again, in this composition right here, we do not have any keyframes, so it's a fresh and nicely new comp. So like I told you, when you speed up your video, the best motion blur is to use CC Force motion blur. But let me show you why this won't work on this clip right here. So we could go ahead and dial in CC Force motion blur, drag it on here. So the motion blur samples are basically the quality of the motion blur. So the higher the number, the better the quality, but the longer it takes to render. And the shutter angle is basically how much motion blur you want. So the one is the quality and the other is the amount. I like to use a value between 30 and 60 because as you see right here, you see every motion blur frame right there. So we want to increase the quality. When you dial in 30, for example, this is much more cleaned out. The shutter angle, I like to leave it to 180 because that's usually enough. But sometimes when I want to add more motion blur, I go to 270. So let me pre-render this and I will show you why this won't work on this example. Okay, now our pre-render is done. Let me play this one back for you. So with CC motion blur, we got these weird wheels and it looks like we didn't even stabilize this in first place. So this is a really rare scenario, but because, let me go into the first clip right here, because there's so much wobbling and tilting and shifting in the source clip right here. So CC motion blur looks on our native clip, so the first clip we just speed up and then tries to calculate the motion blur. So because our first clip was pretty shaky and not stable, this motion blur effect won't work. Like I told you, this is a really rare scenario and this happened to me only on this clip. So let me show you another example where this works perfectly. So this is a clip from Berlin where I was basically just running past these pillars right there. And I will demonstrate you how CC Force motion blur usually works. And as you see, I already stabilized this. I already fixed the borders. And as you see, this looks pretty like stuttery and not really smooth. So let's add CC Force motion blur. Even when I just enable the effect, you can see the changes right there. So let me play back this one for you. So as you see, this looks really smooth. This is like native motion blur because After Effects actually calculates the sub frames from this clip instead of just guessing the vector motion. So yeah, this is how CC Force motion blur should actually work. But like I said, in our case, the wobbling and the shakiness was too much for it. So let's delete forced motion blur in our first place and add real smart motion blur on this one instead. Again, this uses a vector calculation of the motion, so it guesses the motion and tries to smear in, but honestly you won't even notice this. So yeah, that's basically it. I like to have the motion blur on top of everything else and burned in, so I export this video with already the motion blur, so Premiere or my other editing programs will have an easier time and they don't have to work with this heavy effect. So again, we stayed at 4K, we have still native 4K, so I go ahead and choose File, Export, Add to Render Queue. I go ahead and dial in Custom, QuickTime, Format, and choose 422 HQ, or again, if you're working on a Windows, go ahead and choose DNX HR, or Cineform is also pretty good because these are all I codecs. So I go ahead and choose 422 HQ. Again, click on OK. Because I shot this on my Sony a7S II, it doesn't support 10-bit, so I'm go ahead and choose 8-bit instead of my output. I do not want any audio. Click on OK. Choose the destination where I want to save it. I choose stabilized exports, click on save, and then I hit render. That's basically it for the video hyperlapse. There are basically 4 steps. First, speed up your clip. Second, track the position. Third, get rid of the black borders. And fourth, add motion blur. So we usually don't have to deal with the rotation when we're doing a video hyperlapse. Now let's head over to some common challenges and problems you could face while stabilizing your hyperlapse.